It's the best Souls copycat. I just don't like Souls copycats. Like, make your own game, bro. Okay, what the hell? You thought! Oh, it's a grab. Does every single boss have a nasty grab, dude? Why am I so good at parrying that one move?
I know my way around a weapon.
But before we get into that, welcome to Dungeon Hunter 6, a game where bosses shapeshift into these 100 unique bosses. The still score mounting are graphic and many scrolls. Pro Matt. Stop complaining. Hello. Hi guys, welcome. By the way, I just realized I'll probably be on only the demo today. The demo actually took me 8 hours. I heard it's like 2 hours, 1 to 2 hours or something. Dude, Geppetto is sussy, dude. Geppetto has definitely got some weird shit going on, for sure. Just so you guys know. We're using my new controller that I bought. Guys, look at this new controller that I bought. Hopefully it works. Ready, guys? Ready, guys? Look, it's a fresh... This new controller feels so good. I love it.
Can you hear me? Geppetto's puppet. We need your help.
Okay, so we're gonna make it. We're gonna commit to learning the story of this game. There's too many games I don't learn the story to, and we're committing here. We're gonna be here for a long time, so we're gonna commit. What the hell? I don't know what happened. Everything crashed and my scene didn't save. Wait, I don't remember what way we came from. I think we came from the chair. Okay, so we're gonna actually learn this game, guys, okay? And by learn, I mean the story. I think it looks really cool. It doesn't look very cheap, but I was worried it was one of those games that look good but feel cheap in the end. A special device that releases all of P organ. All of the P organ. Oh, you guys can't read the side of the screen. Let me read it for you. A special device that releases all of P organ's energy at once. Dies upon use. Yes, it says P organ. It's a little goofy. It's a little goofy.
Arm yourself with one of the weapons over there.
Ooh. Okay, so I don't remember what weapon I did in the demo, but we're just gonna start fresh. I'm not gonna try and remember what I did. It doesn't matter. Okay, I know I just said that I won't try, but I think I did Dex the first time. So maybe we should do strength. Balance. I don't know what this little dagger is, but it's cute. I'm gonna try. Obtain. Yes. A Fable Catalyst. A catalyst made to supplement puppet abilities. Rapidly charges Fable. What is Fable? Oh, it's blue.
Vai ser tipo a experiência dela jogando, né? Tipo um negócio assim. Não tá dizendo nada, mano, eu acho. Vamos ver esse vídeo aqui do Iron Pineapple, 16 minutinhos.
Armored Core 6 is fantastic. I'm officially a fan. And in fact, I'm such a fan that I've played through the entire game 3 times already. AC6 is an explosive power fantasy of bullets, missiles, and laser swords. It's a complete and utter spectacle of fast-paced mech combat unlike anything I've ever played. It's just really good. And in a year so stacked with big releases, this one deserves your attention too. However, despite all my praise, I want to be careful not to set expectations too high, because I still have some mixed feelings, and I still think some people won't necessarily click with this game as much as I did. Unlike a game like Elden Ring, I wouldn't be surprised to see some reviewers not be in love with it. This is the type of game I expect IGN to give like an 8, you know? It simply doesn't have that same sort of universal appeal and won't come even close to Elden Ring's sales. What I just said isn't a critique, by the way, simply an observation and guess at how things will play out. So before you go running off to buy it, let's talk about it. As I mentioned in my preview video, I didn't grow up playing Armored Core. Instead, Demon's Souls was my introduction to From Software in 2009. And if you aren't familiar with my channel, I think From Software makes some cool stuff. When AC6 was announced, I deliberately chose to not play all of the old games in the series. I did this so that I could provide a more relatable perspective to everyone watching, and that's the perspective of someone who hasn't touched Armored Core, but who's still a FromSoft fan thanks to one or more of their Soulsborne Kuro Ring games. I'm willing to bet the overwhelming majority of you who are interested in this game share that perspective. First, AC6 is not a Souls-like. It plays very, very differently from the Souls series, and at best has a couple Souls-adjacent elements, like, for example, challenging boss fights that revolve around you learning a set of big telegraphed attacks one failed attempt at a time. What is this game then? Well, it's a third-person mech action game about piloting a highly customizable mech. You go on missions, you earn money, and then you spend that money to purchase a wide variety of parts for your mech. Most missions are relatively bite-sized and see you completing 1 or 2 objectives, and those objectives pretty much always involve you blowing something up. And the whole time, a story unfolds in the background as you, a mercenary mech pilot, get hired by different groups and corporations on the planet of Rubicon 3, a planet with a mysterious past and a turbulent present. Now, let's get into why this game is actually good. The gameplay. If you want a complete breakdown of the controls, check out my preview video from last month. But as a brief overview, you control a mech equipped with 4 weapons simultaneously that each shoot at enemies. This is facilitated by a lock-on system that targets whatever is closest to the center of your screen, and it can be toggled to a more traditional hard lock-on like something you'd see in a Souls game. You can ascend into the air by flying, use quick boosts to avoid attacks, and use an assault boost to close gaps and be aggressive. These actions all require energy, which is basically just a stamina bar that refills whenever you're on the ground. Your weapon choices matter a lot because different weapons are effective at different ranges, so combat becomes a dance of constantly moving, dodging, and flying as you do your best to keep your target at the most effective distance. I found myself really drawn to the close range stuff, and one of my favorite combos was a melee weapon paired with a shotgun, and then 2 laser cannons or grenade launchers on my back. You can unlock some truly over-the-top weapons. Small enemies go down quick, but other ACs and bosses are where the gameplay really shines. Here, it's not just about dealing damage, it's about filling up their stagger bars to then follow up with big attacks when they're in a staggered state. All weapons have different impact values, which is what determines how easily you can stagger an enemy. So a key part of decision making when choosing weapons should be focused on making sure you can build up that stagger bar properly. It's also good to remember that you have a whole extra dimension to play with in the form of jumping and flying over enemies. This can be critical in avoiding attacks and landing your own, and it's the biggest thing I think new players might forget to do when they're starting out. The boss fights and mech duels are where this game really clicked for me. Bear with me for a minute, I promise this is relevant, but let's look at a boss fight in Elden Ring real quick. It's you versus the boss. You watch the boss closely for telegraphed attacks, you dodge those attacks, then you find openings between attacks to damage the boss yourself. And then you need to do all of this while managing your stamina. This is essentially how every fight goes. It's great, it's fun. However, here's why Armored Core 6 feels so fresh to me. Combat has all of those same elements, but with several additional layers of complexity on top. You're not just avoiding telegraphed attacks, you're also constantly managing your distance from the enemy with specific ranges to make the best use of your weapons. And you're not just doing that on a flat 2D plane, you're also flying through the air and taking advantage of the third dimension. You're not just attacking the boss with a single weapon, you're using 4 weapons simultaneously. And you're not just mindlessly firing those weapons, you're managing their ammo count, reload time, cooldown speed, and hell, even their overheat gauge. You're not just attacking to lower their health, you're also attacking to deal impact damage so you can stagger them. And these staggers are not just opportunities to press a button for a critical hit. They're small windows where you yourself need to deal damage based on what you have equipped, what range you're at, and what's on cooldown. Every second counts. And there's still more, but am I starting to paint a picture here? Coming off the heels of stamina-based Souls-likes, this experience of having to juggle so many different things and make split-second decisions was incredibly refreshing. It's fun. It works. Although, part of my hesitation at the start of this video is rooted in knowing that some people simply won't want to deal with all of this, because on some level, you do need to engage with all the systems in this game to have fun and make progress. And I realize this description can sound overwhelming or intimidating, and it can be at first, but trust me when I say it's not nearly as crazy as it seems, and I do think you'll get it after only a couple hours, just like I did. By the end of the game, I wasn't even thinking about the controls. I would just see what I had to do and execute. And while difficulty is subjective, this is absolutely the type of game where you can make fights pretty easy if you go in with the right setup. Just don't be scared. This game isn't actually unapproachable by any means, and it's clear FromSoft has made a huge effort to make things accessible. At the end of the day though, this is a game about doing rad shit. It's about dual-wielding Gatling guns while you have giant lasers strapped to your back, or using wacky stuff like a plasma ninja shuriken whip. It's about the spectacle and the explosions and the audio-visual extravaganza of it all. And these fun combat mechanics help facilitate that. And you can listen to me ramble and watch footage of this game all you want, but until you feel the game for yourself, you won't truly get it. AC6 provides a sort of rush from its moment-to-moment gameplay that not many games reach, and simply piloting your mech is an incredibly memorable experience. Now, let's briefly discuss the customization, because that's the other central part of this game, and also where I think it's possible to play in a way that's wrong. I'll elaborate on what I mean by that in a minute. In between missions, you have 11 different slots to equip weapons and change out your mech parts. Again, refer to the previous video if you want a more step-by-step breakdown, but basically there are a lot of choices here, and you can really go down a rabbit hole of fine-tuning the exact loadout you want. And as long as you stay within your weight and energy limits, you can use whatever you want. Aside from weapon choice, the biggest thing you can customize are the legs on your mech. You got standard bipedal, reverse joint, tetrapod, and tank legs. These all have a huge impact on your mobility. For example, reverse joint gets these extra long jumps when quick boosting, as well as high jumps off the ground, and tetrapods can hover in the air for a low energy cost and fire the really big weapons without needing to slow down. The bottom line is that legs can change up the game significantly. Now, why did I say it's possible to play the game wrong here? Basically, I think such a huge part of the enjoyment in this game comes from experimenting with all the different options you're provided with. There truly is an impressive amount of variety when it comes to playstyles, and stuff like your weapon choices change the entire feel of the game. And I think it's possible to miss out on some of this. You might either find something that works and just never change it up, or you might look up a guide on YouTube and equip the most overpowered setup. This would be a mistake, and you'd be robbing yourself of what could have been a more enjoyable experience. Some of my most memorable encounters in the game were when I get to a new boss, get demolished, and then tinker with my setup each subsequent attempt. There's immense satisfaction to be had from clearing something with a setup that's uniquely yours, and the more you experiment with different weapons and mech parts, the more you hold on to that feeling. So yeah, just remember to take advantage of everything the game has to offer, and resist the temptation of looking up the best setups, at least on your first playthrough. Every single thing you can buy can be refunded for 100% of your money back at any time, so go nuts and don't hold back. Now, let's go over how missions are handled. Typically, you're given a straightforward objective marker, and then you just fly off to do it. As a machine of death and destruction, you can probably guess that these objectives usually involve blowing something up. In terms of length, some missions are super quick and only take a couple minutes, though most missions fall somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. Keep in mind, these times I'm giving you assume you beat them first try, and that will very much not be the case on the tougher ones with bosses. Several of them really push me to figure out the best approach. There's also arena missions, which are quick one-on-one duels against other ACs. In my previous video, I said you're not here to explore. You get in and you get out. And while that is true for a lot of missions, it's not entirely true for all of them. Sometimes you get these longer ones with large environments and a handful of things to find. The three categories of collectibles are wrecked ACs that you can scan for data logs, which contain bits of lore, optional enemies that drop combat logs that unlock special parts when you get enough, and the occasional part containers that contain mech parts as well as weapons. So yes, the large missions do have some level of optional exploration, but I don't want to give the wrong impression here. These levels are still very linear and smaller than they seem, with lots of empty space. Here's an expertly drawn diagram to help explain what I mean. There's always a clear critical path to follow with invisible walls along the way, and the bonus stuff comes in the form of short detours to the side. I think this is fun and works well for what this game is going for, but don't expect anything too crazy in terms of exploration, since that's not really the focus. That being said, don't skip out on exploring the big levels. In classic FromSoft fashion, some really cool stuff like secret powerful weapons are hidden and missable. If nothing else, I think these missions succeed in offering consistent variety. You will rarely do the same thing more than once. For example, there's a stealth mission. That is the one stealth mission. There's also an escort mission. That is the one escort mission. Bosses also feel very distinct from one another with their own tricks and gimmicks. All of this goes a long way to keep the game from getting repetitive, and I think that's key to making a game like this work. On top of that, beginning in Chapter 3, you start to be presented with decisions in the form of deciding which mission to select between two choices. This only happens a handful of times, but these choices result in entirely different missions with story consequences as well. You'll miss out on a good chunk of content if you only play through the game once. Speaking of story consequences, I want to make a quick aside about the story of AC6. And don't worry, I won't go into any specifics or spoilers. I really enjoyed it. The characters and voice acting performances were consistently entertaining, and I was invested in the lore and history of this world in a way I didn't expect to be. Most of it is presented through pre- and post-mission audio messages alongside radio chatter during the missions themselves, and it's incredibly interesting to see this hyper-militarized society run by military corporations who are all fighting amongst themselves. You'll get hired by one corporation to attack the base of another, and then the very next mission will see that corporation you just attacked hiring you to strike back at the original ones because, hey, you're a mercenary after all. It's great and borders on parody at times. When the story gets going, those climaxes really climax, you know? And don't worry, this is a story you'll be able to easily follow without 10 supplemental YouTube lore videos, so that'll be a nice change of pace for you Souls fans. Now, let's talk about the big question that's going to be divisive for some people. How long is this game? It's a little complicated, but the quick answer is that it's shorter than some people might expect. I think my first playthrough took about 12 hours, and that consisted of 37 story missions and 29 arena missions. Keep in mind, I tend to finish games faster than most people, so I think something in the 15 to 20 hour range might be more accurate for most people. It all depends on how much you struggle and how much you take your time with customizing. So that does sound kind of short, and I know some people may be disappointed after hearing that number. I was even feeling that myself at first. But it's not the whole story. This is a game that practically begs to be replayed, and that's for several reasons. First, you have the branching path missions that occur during chapters 3, 4, and 5 that offer new gameplay and new story. Second, it's entirely possible to play through the game without touching 90% of the customization options, so a second playthrough is the perfect chance to experiment with stuff you never got around to. You'll also continue unlocking new mech parts and weapons during New Game Plus that weren't available during your first playthrough. Next, and this is a big one, New Game Plus adds missions that weren't even options during your first playthrough. In other words, this isn't including the branching path missions of chapters 3, 4, and 5. I won't go into specifics for spoiler reasons, but you'll be presented with alternate versions of some missions as early as chapters 1 and 2. These new missions are usually harder to compensate for you being experienced at the game and having better equipment. They also affect the story and provide new insight into the world and characters, so this is pretty notable if you care about the story of the game like I did. You also get a few extra arena missions too. Lastly, and this one really shocked me, this all continues into New Game Plus 2, so a third playthrough. You'll get a handful of extra missions, story beats, and unlocks not available in the first two playthroughs. This is awesome, and exactly what I want to see from games with New Game Plus options. Like, as much as I love FromSoft, I've always been disappointed that the idea of changing things in New Game Plus was only really explored in Dark Souls 2. I would have loved to see other Souls games experiment with it, so it's great we get to see an even more fleshed out version of that here in AC6. Bottom line is, yes, this game is on the shorter side if you're a one and done kind of person, but you'll be missing out on a fair bit if that's how you do it. And it's clear this game was designed to be replayed. Those 37 missions for one playthrough are actually closer to somewhere in the mid-50s when you account for all the extra stuff. And while I didn't get a chance to play it yet, PvP is a whole extra layer of content that I can see people messing around with for hours on end. So that's worth keeping in mind if you're really focused on money spent to hours played ratios. Moving on, I want to discuss some of my mixed feelings about the game, and points where I anticipate other people maybe not clicking with it. First, while I love the combat and all of its mechanics, this game is kind of all over the place in terms of difficulty. And I'm not talking about the difficulty that results from your customization options. Like, I love the boss fights and big set piece moments, but chunks of the game where you're just fighting the smaller enemies rarely pushed me, and as a result, I was less engaged by them. This one is tough for me to nail down because I don't know what the solution should have been. A lot of this is a consequence of the game's structure and giving frequent checkpoints with no penalty for dying, so there's really no incentive for worrying about taking damage outside of boss fights in most missions. Like, sure, there's repair costs, but money is simply not an issue when the game gives huge payouts and you can sell everything back at a 100% refund. As a result, chunks of this game can feel too easy, but like I said, I don't know what the solution should have been because the alternative of having no checkpoints could have made the longer missions too tedious. What I'm trying to say is that I wish the difficulty was handled a bit differently, and I wish the non-boss sections were more engaging. The good news is that if you share my feelings about difficulty, there still is an additional challenge to be had in the form of replaying missions for S ranks. Here, you'll be ranked based on time, damage taken, and ammunition costs. And while these seem to be purely optional and just for trophies or bragging rights, they do help provide a much needed layer of challenge for the easier missions. The second thing I was slightly disappointed by was the scope of the game, for lack of a better word. It kind of ties in with the length, but not exactly. Basically, I just wanted more of the big levels with huge 3D environments and little secrets to find, and I wanted more big set piece moments. For example, the desert excavator level was such a blast in chapter 1 with how you're mounting the giant machine and you have to navigate around it while destroying enemies and avoiding laser blasts. This is the type of mission I wanted to see more of. There's a bunch of smaller and shorter levels, and a lot of these reuse environments from earlier missions.
Mas deve ser bem caro de fazer, né? Tá, porra, tem que jogar, descer essas garrafas tudo. A From sempre tenta fazer uns set pieces, né, de vez em quando.
And while I enjoyed these, found them fun, and thought they did a good job of maintaining variety throughout the entire game, I would have felt a lot better about them had there been just a bit more of the bigger ones. All this is a long way of saying, I just wanted a little more. I hope I don't sound too negative here. My goal is not to nitpick or dissuade you from playing, but rather to just be as honest as possible while also attempting to explain what I anticipate to be slightly more mixed reactions than your typical FromSoft game. But fuck man, when this game is good, it's really good. There are just so many fun and satisfying moments. Here's my mic audio after I beat one of the final bosses in the game. Oh, yes! Oh my fucking god! Dude, I peaked my mic when I wasn't even planning to record audio. That's how excited I was. I couldn't hold it in. Those are the types of feelings this game can evoke, and FromSoft is really the master of their craft when it comes to that. I honestly wasn't sure if this game would be for me. As a person who's more drawn to fantasy settings, mech games had never really appealed to me, but I'm so glad I took the time to experience this one because it really is something special and unique and unlike anything I've ever played. This game is just cool. I don't know what else to say. So with that in mind, I really hope this is just the beginning of Armored Core making a comeback. This is an incredible foundation that I want to see expanded upon, and I know it won't get even close to the number of sales of something like Elden Ring, but I hope people still give it a shot and try something outside of their comfort zone. I promise you, Baldur's Gate 3 will still be waiting for you when you get back. Thanks for watching, and if you get the game for yourself, I hope you have as much fun as I did. Despite the obvious of the story and setting being unique, there's a number of mechanics that make this game stand out too. As a baseline though, Bloodborne meets Sekiro really is the best description. First, when attacking big enemies and bosses, you slowly build up a stagger meter that leads into a critical attack, but you can also perfect parry to build up that meter even more while avoiding damage. Sekiro is the obvious inspiration here as it's kinda close to how it works there. However, this game really makes you earn that stagger because once you've parried and hit them enough, their health bar becomes outlined in white for only a small window of time, and you need to land a fully charged heavy attack to actually trigger the stagger. This is tough since your charged heavy attack is slow, the window you have is only a few seconds, and the enemy might not give you a clear opening. But it's a nice challenge and dynamic that's pretty unique and feels impactful and satisfying when you finally do land that big hit. In addition to parrying and dodging, blocking is an option, but again, Lies of P has a new take on the concept. In addition to costing stamina, you also lose a bit of health, but it's recoverable health. If you attack shortly after blocking, you can get that health back. You can also get some of this health back by landing a perfect parry during the same time frame. This too is tricky since if you take any damage while not blocking during this window, the health is no longer recoverable via attacking. I've seen several reviewers say it's just like Bloodborne, but here you have to be far more deliberate with your blocking and subsequent health recovery as opposed to just going feral and attacking like you would after getting hit in Bloodborne. If you're careful with your blocks and don't block more than 1 or 2 hits at a time, you can easily get into a habit of recovering all or most of your health. There's also big red attacks called Fury attacks that must be parried and cause a fair bit of stagger buildup on the enemy if you successfully land it. Normal blocking isn't an option, and dodging, which in all other circumstances gives iframes, doesn't give iframes for these attacks. However, you can still avoid a lot of these moves if you get out of the way by running back or to the side, so that's good to keep in mind as another option. This is a demanding game, and I found myself pushed into utilizing each of my defensive options to succeed. I will say though that perfect parrying and guarding is pretty central to the experience, so don't make the mistake of playing it like Dark Souls or Bloodborne with too much dodging. But also don't swing too hard the other way and never dodge. Basically, just remember that despite all the comparisons I'm making, Lies of P is ultimately its own thing, and you need to approach it as its own thing as opposed to Bloodborne 2 or Sekiro 2. Even so, once you figure out what this game wants from you, it's fucking hard. There is some really precise timing required on parries, and it feels far less forgiving than Sekiro with a tighter window for success. When you combine that with bosses that move erratically and like to delay their attacks with huge windups and mix-ups, this is a game you're gonna die a lot in. Despite my enjoyment, I think there is certainly an argument to be made for the parry window to be extended just a hair, especially when some red attacks are disproportionately punishing for how quickly they can come out. And relying on reaction speed will not be enough for some of these attacks. You really need to internalize the timing required for parries as opposed to using purely visual cues. Back on the topic of mechanics in this game, every weapon has 2 Fable Arts, which are basically just weapon arts, but you can activate them after building up enough blue Fable bars after landing enough hits. This is a slow process, and to balance this, Fable Arts are usually very impactful. And that brings us to one of the coolest mechanics of the game, weapon assembly. With the exception of special boss weapons, every weapon in the game can be split in half between its blade and handle, and that means you can mix and match any blade with any handle. This enables some impressive variety in player expression. Let's go over how it works. The moveset and weapon scaling of any weapon is determined by the handle, but the damage and speed of the weapon is influenced by the blade. So for example, you could stick a giant hammerhead on a dagger handle to hit harder, and it'll have the exact same dagger moveset, but it's going to be slower. Also, each blade and handle has different Fable Arts, so those are also getting mixed up into interesting combos during the assembly process as well. Additionally, when upgrading a weapon with upgrade materials, you only upgrade the blade. Here's a really cool consequence of this system that I think some people might overlook, and I'll illustrate it with an example that happened early on in my first playthrough. I opened a chest and found this cool booster glaive weapon. I equipped it to see it had this sick charge attack that boosts you forward, and I was tempted to use it, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to invest in the upgrade materials to do so. This is a common scenario in Souls games, right? You find something new, but you've already invested materials into your current weapon. Well, guess what? Here, I just took the weapon head I was already using and stuck it on the booster glaive, and boom, I got to use this new weapon without needing to invest materials just to test it out. This is kind of huge, and lends itself to way more experimentation and variety than most games in the genre. Now, all that being said, the funny thing is that I didn't use this feature nearly as much as I wanted to because the non-customizable boss weapons were so fucking cool. I had an umbrella rapier that expanded and could block hits, a sword with a frankly silly amount of moves and mobility, and a scythe with an extendable Whiphead. The bottom line is there's just so much variety and fun designs when it comes to offensive options, and I would love to see this weapon assembly system explored further in other games in the future. Speaking of offensive options, there's also the Legion arm. It's a mechanical arm that functions very similarly to the Shinobi prosthetic from Sekiro, and it lets you mix in a bunch of different moves. You can drag enemies toward you, use your hand like a flamethrower, plant landmines in the ground, use a shield that explodes on impact, or just straight up have a gun with explosive bullets. Here's another neat idea Lies of P has. You can break the weapons of enemies if you land enough perfect parries, and what's even crazier is that this applies to bosses too. This lowers the damage and reach of their attacks for the rest of the fight. I think this whole mechanic is super cool. It's a nice way of rewarding the player for playing with extra precision. This game also does some fun stuff with weapon durability. Basically, your weapon loses durability over time as you attack and block, and you can repair it at any time by using your arm as a grindstone. When you're exploring levels, it honestly barely deserves to exist as a mechanic, but boss fights are where it actually gets interesting. After the first few fights, basically every boss required me to repair my weapon at least once mid-fight, and finding an opening can be difficult. This whole mechanic is justified for the moment of sheer panic that happen when you forget to repair your weapon and then it bounces off the boss mid-fight. On top of that, there's a debuff some enemies inflict called Decay, and in addition to draining your health, it rapidly drains your weapon's durability. So yeah, weapon durability is something that seems pointless early on, but I like how they turned it into a mechanic that you need to pay attention to, adding just that extra bit of challenge to an already difficult game. Weapon durability can almost be entirely ignored in most Souls-likes that decide to include it, so it's a nice change of pace to see one where it's a core mechanic. Also, the healing mechanic in Lies of P is kind of neat. Basically, it functions like an Estus flask, but when you run out of charges, you can recharge an additional use by landing enough hits. This creates scenarios where a comeback is always possible during a boss fight if you play well enough. And yeah, I basically found myself using all of my healing on every boss fight, so it came up more than you might think. So there are more quirks to the combat, but I hope I've painted a picture of how this game has its own identity, even if you look at it from a purely mechanical level. It's not just another Souls-like with no new ideas being brought to the table. Take it from someone who's played a lot of these games. I definitely don't always get the impression of a strong identity when playing Souls-likes. Let's move on and talk about level design. For game developers, you can have the best Souls-like combat system in the world, but your game will live or die by its level design. And I've seen so many games not pull this part off. I don't think everyone realizes just how much heavy lifting level design does for these games. Even when looking at FromSoft's own games, the level design is absolutely critical for these games being as fun as they are. One of the biggest reasons for this is that regardless of the spin you put on it, Souls-like combat is inherently very simple. You'll be repeating the same attacks and dodges over and over. Therefore, it's necessary that these games have A, a wide variety of different enemy types, and B, a variety of different encounter types. Basically, imagine a game where you keep fighting the same enemies one-on-one over and over again. This is a recipe for a game that will quickly get monotonous, and if you pay attention, you'll notice that FromSoft is typically very good at avoiding this. And since they were taking extremely thorough notes, the devs of Lies of P avoid this too. I was consistently presented with encounters that put pressure on me. One of the simplest examples of this concept is when an enemy is attacking you with a range attack, but there are one or more enemies between you and them. Do you focus on the closer enemy while avoiding the range attacks, or do you run past them to take out the range enemy? Either way, there's pressure and choice involved, and it makes for an interesting encounter. There's lots of other variations of this concept of mixing up enemies, like maybe you need to fight multiple of this old enemy at once, or maybe you need to fight on a narrow walkway, or maybe there's an ambush after you pick up an item, or maybe there's two dudes with flamethrowers coming at you while bombs are being thrown from further up. Lots of possibilities. And that's just the enemy component of level design. You also have the physical geometry and map layout of level design. And again, yes, there's not much to say beyond this being executed on the level of a FromSoft game. Levels wrap around on themselves, they're shortcuts, verticality, secrets, that type of thing. And that's to say nothing of the beautiful environments and vistas and graphical fidelity on display here. It's top-notch stuff, and the end result is that if you told me FromSoft made this game, I'd probably believe you. The only notable deviation is that Lies of P is more linear than any of the FromSoft games. Arguably too linear. There are still side paths, but there's fewer than you'd see from something like Dark Souls or Bloodborne, and there's pretty much always a clear path forward to the boss. To be clear, I think this is fine and works well for Lies of P, but it's the main thing that stands out if you're strictly comparing it one-to-one with FromSoft. And I did find myself wishing for moments where I could get lost or stumble across some really big secret or lengthy detour. One of my favorite things in most FromSoft games is how there are so many huge secrets that are optional and easy to miss. With how well the devs of Lies of P nailed the environments and the atmosphere, I think this game would have benefited from letting you engage with it more in the form of more exploration. Now, let's take a few minutes to focus on the bosses of this game and discuss combat more so I can go into more detail. To reiterate, some of the bosses in this game are extremely difficult, and while that difficulty is comparable to Sekiro, some bosses push past that into even more difficult territory. This is the type of game where you'll get beat so bad on your first attempt that it makes you sit up in your chair and think, damn, how am I going to do this? And then you'll die a couple more times, finally get it, and then find out that was just phase 1. Get ready for another health bar. I expect this to be the most polarizing aspect of the game, and I've already read quite a few opinions from critics and other people who think this game is too difficult. I think that's a fair opinion to have, especially within the context of difficulty spikes and feeling like levels prior to boss fights don't prepare you enough. But what I like about this game is that it demands you actually learn the whole fight. Like, by the time I'd beaten a boss, most of the time I learned how to respond to every single attack, and then it became a dance of executing properly. Very few Souls-likes demand this level of performance. Hell, you can fumble your way through plenty of FromSoft boss fights without really needing to learn the whole fight. And that's okay, but I like the challenge Lies of P presents you with. And for someone like me, who's pretty experienced at these games, but not amazing by any means, it was refreshing to really be pushed. Because despite it all, I know some people are going to disagree, I don't consider this game unfair. Pretty much every time I died, I was like, okay, fair enough. Making a game difficult isn't that hard. There's plenty of bullshit you can introduce. But to make a game difficult in a way that still feels fair with clearly telegraphed attacks, and where players will keep trying after a dozen failed attempts, that's a challenge. And I feel like Neowiz nailed it here. There are mix-ups and tricky timings with slow and fast versions of certain attacks. Puppet enemies will often confuse you at first with disjointed attack animations, and it feels like every enemy in the game has multiple attacks with huge windups perfectly designed to throw you off. All this is very tough, but never genuine bullshit. Or at least 95% of the time it wasn't bullshit. Could some of the elite enemies and bosses with long attack chains be toned down just a bit? And would the game be better with just 1 or 2 extra frames for the parry window? Maybe, yeah, but as it stands, it's still very doable and fun if you're into challenging games.
Eu discordo, eu acho que é um pouquinho injusto. Em vários momentos, assim. Então não é um pouquinho injusto, né? Mas enfim.
I'll come back to the topic in a bit, but let's keep discussing boss mechanics for now. Despite the difficulty, the developers aren't completely heartless, and they added an optional NPC summon to boss fights to help. In theory, I like this approach to difficulty, and it's
Grande bosta esse espectro, né? O boss derrete ele.
similar to what FromSoft does. For some of the fights, I'd say your summon is somewhat helpful as they keep aggro off of you, but for the really tough ones, that summon will almost never survive in the phase 2 of a fight, and that's usually where you need the most help. So regardless of if you choose to use summons or not, you're still mostly on your own, and you will still need to learn the fight. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a patch that buffs your summon in the coming days or weeks to help people actually beat this game. Boss fights also revolve around staggers, both big and small.
O espectro é mais uma ajudinha, né? Tipo, uma ajudinha, não é uma muleta.
Staggers come in the form of the boss simply stumbling for a moment and then you get an extra hit in, and the big staggers are the ones I mentioned earlier where you need to land a charge heavy attack once your health bar turns white. While it mostly felt fair for me with my dexterity build, I think the window...
Mano, como eu morri pra esse Andreus, cara. Eu acho que ele foi o chefe que mais morri no jogo. Eu morri umas 20 vezes pra
You need to
ele.
land a charge heavy attack once your health bar turns white.
Ele é
While it
o
mostly felt fair
quarto. Ele é o quarto chefe principal.
for me with my dexterity build, I think the window for big staggers can be punishingly short for strength builds and slower weapons, and there were times where it actually felt impossible to land the hit. If you don't land that charge heavy attack, you simply miss out on getting that big critical hit. And missing that big critical hit is a bigger deal than you might think, because in addition to not getting that extra damage, you also don't remove the recoverable health from the boss, because that's another mechanic I hadn't mentioned until now. Bosses slowly regain the faded portion of their health bars over time, kind of similar to how you recover health. It only critical...
Um dos melhores chefes do jogo, King of Puppets. Eu gosto mais da primeira fase do que da segunda fase, mas eu acho o conjunto da hora. Foda.
Hits from staggers completely remove their recoverable health. This health regen mechanic might sound annoying, but I think it's slow enough that you might not even notice it, and I think its main purpose is to discourage you from playing in a slow and tedious way where you get maybe one hit in at a time and then run away. Instead, you're encouraged to keep up the aggression at all times. I think this is a clever way to subtly push players into that playstyle. Next, a nitpick I have is about how this game still commits to the run back for boss fights. Sekiro and Elden Ring largely ditched this part of the game, and I think it was for the best. I can see the merit of it in some cases, but for Lies of P, it just felt like a holdover from Dark Souls without really adding to the experience. And this is a game where most boss fights are going to take quite a few attempts, so it gets annoying. One critique I want to address is the claim that there are too many two-phase boss fights. And when I say two-phase, I'm specifically talking about how the boss will transform into basically a new fight after you deal enough damage or clear the first health bar. I'm torn on this because I think the fights are very well done, but I'm sympathetic to the idea of boss fatigue. For example, fighting the first phase repeatedly because the second phase keeps kicking your ass can be incredibly frustrating, since all you really want to do is just learn the moveset for phase 2, but you slowly need to get there each time by repeating phase 1, which you may have mastered already. So yeah, not sure where I personally land on this topic, just wanted to bring it up and let you know I'm mixed on it, and I see where people are coming from when they complain. Despite that, I really want to stress that overall, the boss fights are fantastic. These are some of the most challenging and beautifully animated bosses I've seen in the genre as a whole, and some of them manage to bring new ideas to the table too. You got stuff like having a boss that's essentially two bosses stuck together and two different fights depending on which side you approach it from, or doing the classic Ornstein and Smo, but there's 3 different Ornsteins. While many of these bosses reside within the territory of familiar if you play a few games in the genre, there's still some new stuff here, which I think is pretty commendable. I want to make another side note about the difficulty, and I might repeat myself a bit, but I think it's important I include this since this really is the deal breaker for a lot of people. Yes, this game is very difficult. I totally get it. However, I've been reading some takes
Difícil pra caralho.
from people calling for major overhauls to the entire combat system, like, for example, massively increasing...
Tipo, eu acho que ele é o jogo Souls mais difícil que eu já joguei, mano. Mais difícil que Nioh 2, que todos os Dark Souls. Talvez só não é mais difícil que o Sekiro, mas eu não considero o Sekiro Souls, né? Eu sou uma dessas pessoas.
The parry window, or letting you animation cancel any attack. I totally get where they're coming from, and I empathize with the frustration that spurred these suggestions, but I think it's the wrong call. Like I said earlier,
Essa gentinha, né?
yeah, maybe a very slight buff to parries would be good, and maybe some minor adjustments to certain attacks could reduce some friction, but nothing completely game-changing. This game was clearly meticulously designed, and choices like attacks not being cancelable, or your parry window being relatively small, are not mistakes or accidents. They're just different from what a lot of people are used to, and that's why I hesitate on agreeing with calls for major changes to the combat system. Some of these suggestions will have cascading effects that would disrupt the whole...
Segundo chefe que mais morri. Essa laxacia. Como é que é? Laxacia. Nossa, é muito difícil. Laxacia. Muito difícil o nome desse chefe, mano.
balance of the game. The main piece of advice I'd give is don't let your preconceptions about what this game is or your assumptions about what this game wants from you get in the way of your own success. More specifically, while perfect parrying is a central mechanic, it's not the only mechanic, and you don't need to parry every single attack. The way I've seen people talk about this game, it feels like they're treating it like the sequel to Sekiro, and that's a mistake. Guarding and dodging are still extremely useful. Like when people complain about an enemy doing an attack chain of 7 attacks in a row and saying how it's impossible to parry them all and not rewarding enough, yeah, I get it, but guess what? You never actually...
Sim, o jogo ele quer que você use o parry bastante, mas ao mesmo tempo ele quer que você use também a esquiva e a defesa, tá ligado? E nenhuma das três mecânicas funciona perfeitamente isoladamente. Então ele te obriga a você ficar variando, né? E exige uma concentração e uma percepção muito maior, né, da luta, e meio que você tem que decorar o chefe, né, para saber qual golpe compensa desviar, qual golpe compensa dar parry, qual golpe compensa só defender, né? Tipo, é desafiador.
Needed to parry them all. In fact, on the really quick attacks, it's better to not even attempt parrying. Use dodges, use parries, use fable arts, those are really strong. Fuck it, use consumables, they're actually impactful. Use everything.
Use muitas granadinhas, coquetel molotov, tudo que o jogo te dá. Termite, né, que fala. Bomba. Melhor forma de zerar esse jogo. O modo easy desse jogo são os itens arremessáveis. Esse é o verdadeiro modo easy desse jogo. É forte demais,
You still might not succeed, but trust me, keeping an open mind is pretty critical for this game. The overall response reminds me heavily of when Sekiro first came out, and also when the Neo games came out, and how people bounce off of them because they treated them like Souls games. Some people are playing it like it's Bloodborne, some people are playing it like it's Sekiro. Both groups are wrong. You need to play it like it's Lies of P and meet the game where it's at.
Sim, quando eu comecei a jogar, eu tava jogando como se fosse Sekiro mesmo, tá ligado? E eu só tava tomando na cara, porque é muito difícil acertar o parry entre aspas esse jogo, né? Que é a defesa, bloqueio perfeito. Difícil demais. E o chefe que eu mais morri foi aquele Andreas, porque eu tava com uma arma de força, né? Eu tava investindo numa build de força. E ela era muito lenta, mano. Então, tipo, quando eu não terminava de fazer a animação do combate, já tomava na cara, tá ligado? Tipo, da animação do golpe, no caso. Então eu tava muito frustrante, eu venci meio que na cagada e imediatamente eu troquei de arma. Eu coloquei uma arma, eu mudei minha build pra uma build de destreza, né? Uma build de destreza, uma build de quality, né? Que é força e destreza. Aí eu peguei uma arma mais rápida e aí o jogo começou a fluir pra mim. Aí finalmente o jogo clicou comigo. Mas antes disso, puta que pariu.
I understand how everything I'm saying might come across as me just saying skill issue to anyone who disagrees, but that's really not my goal, and I'm open to discussion and even changing my mind. I really just want people to succeed. Have fun. That's it. Next, I want to go over a list of major and minor critiques I have that I haven't gone into yet. First, as much as I praised the weapon assembly system earlier, I think there's one very questionable design choice that seriously brings it down. Every weapon blade is capable of 2 different swing types, slash and stab, but they're usually only proficient at one. This is denoted by an equal sign for the swing type.
Panela de pressão.
The blade is proficient in, and a down arrow for the swing type it's not proficient in. Side note, this is incredibly easy to miss from a UI perspective. If it was up to me, I would have had a green up arrow and a red down arrow to make this feature unmissable. Anyway, the reason this is questionable is that it seriously limits. I would have had a green up it's not proficient in. Side note, this is incredibly easy to miss from a UI perspective. If it was up to me, I would have had a green up arrow and a red down arrow to make this feature unmissable. Anyway, the reason this is questionable is that it seriously limits customization. Suddenly, sticking a hammerhead on a rapier handle gets a damage penalty, and the only reason I can think of why they made this decision is because they wanted the game to be more realistic. But fuck man, making wacky weapons is the best part of this game. Let me poke enemies with a hammer, let me swing my spear like a sword, lean into that. Genuinely, if they simply remove this damage penalty mechanic, there would be twice as many viable customization options with the added bonus of us getting to see more silly shit. Also, I bet a huge portion of the player base never noticed this and were unknowingly lowering their damage by a significant amount. Next, in addition to leveling up, you have access to your P organ, and yes, it's actually called that. It functions as a skill tree and lets you unlock new abilities and passive buffs. I think this is cool in theory, but it's extremely frustrating that core abilities like the ability to chain dodges or do a...
Isso é ridículo. Mano, a habilidade de você dar uma segunda esquiva, tá ligado? Em seguida estar presa por uma skill tree, tá ligado? Com uma parada que eu tenho que comprar e ativar. E isso é muito zoado. E piora. Ele vai falar,
rolling get up attack or lock behind progression.
Mano, você desviar caído, velho. Isso é tão útil, mano. Nossa, eu cansei de morrer no começo. Porque o inimigo me derrubou. Que é muito fácil o inimigo te derrubar nesse jogo. E te dá uma porrada quando você estiver no chão, quando eu tava no chão, tá ligado? Tipo, mano, eu morri muito desse jeito. Muito. Quando eu ativei essa habilidade, melhorou muito a minha vida.
And technically optional. These moves seriously should have just been part of your base moveset for your character, especially when several complaints about the overall feel of the game get addressed once you have them. Like, for real, if anything gets patched with this game, just give players these abilities from the start. Lastly, this is less a critique and more an observation, but the bloodstain recovery system is kind of interesting.
Não é observação não, é crítica. Isso é uma crítica, galera, né? Para de passar pano pra esse jogo, mano. É uma crítica, isso foi zoado, velho. O jogo é foda. Mas tem que criticar o bagulho é certo, mano. O bagulho tá errado, no caso, né?
I haven't seen other people mention this, likely because they didn't notice it, and I myself didn't notice it until halfway through the game. Basically, anytime you're hit on the way back to your bloodstain to recover your souls, you lose a chunk of your total recoverable amount. However, if you kill the enemy that hit you, that amount you lost becomes recoverable once again. I feel like the intention here was to maybe discourage or punish running past enemies as you try to get back to your bloodstain.
Que?
Once again. I feel like the intention
Eu acho que
your total
eu zerei esse jogo 2 vezes e eu nunca reparei nessa porra.
recoverable amount. However, if you kill the enemy that hit you, that amount you lost becomes recoverable once souls.
Não, tá errado isso. Não é possível.
And I myself didn't notice it until halfway through the game. Basically, anytime you're hit on the way back to your bloodstain to recover your souls.
O quê? Eu nunca reparei nisso, cara. Talvez porque eu não morria muito, né?
You lose a chunk of your total recoverable amount. However, if you kill the enemy that hit you, that amount you lost becomes recoverable once again. I feel like the intention here was to maybe discourage or punish running past enemies as you try to get back to your bloodstain, and instead encourage you to take your time. However, I still ran past enemies most of the time anyway with no issues. So yeah.
Não, velho, não tem como. Não tem como. Run back é... O rei do run back. Nossa senhora, eu nunca matei um inimigo mais de uma vez depois que ele me matava, não, cara. Tipo, passava direto por eles, recuperava meu ergo e seguia em frente.
Neat idea, but I wonder if it could have been adjusted to make it more of a factor in the gameplay. With the critiques out of the way, I want to go over a bunch of things I liked that I also haven't mentioned until now. I like how your outfit is independent from your defense stats. You do still have equipment and equip load.
Eu acho que não foi um erro, né? Foi uma escolha que eu não gostei muito. Eu acho que eles deveriam colocar status nas roupas, tá ligado? E aí você fazia skins, sacou? Sei lá, mano. Não, eu acho que para pensar não é um problema. Eu só queria que tivesse, porque o jogo é muito difícil. Eu queria que tivesse mais opções de você aumentar a defesa, tá ligado? De você melhorar essa build no geral, assim. Mas é interessante. O bom é que a roupa não tem peso, né, por conta disso. Então...
burden to contend with, but the game frames it as internal puppet parts, and as such, it's completely hidden and frees you up to wear whatever outfit you want. I like how heavy and light attacks seamlessly chain into each other. This is something I see a lot of Souls-likes ignore. The speed and utility of heavy attacks caused me to actually use them quite a bit, and I found myself using the entire moveset of my weapon on a regular basis. I like how you can equip special grindstones to your grinder. This gives you access to weapon buffs once per rest, and because status effects are meaningful in this game, it adds an extra layer of customization and variety regardless of your build. I also like how great the voice acting is in this game. They got some really talented people, like, for example, Anthony Howe voicing Geppetto, who you might know as the voice of Margit in Elden Ring.
Always remember that you're precious to me, even when I ask you to do something dangerous.
I like the consistently good sound design and visual feedback across the experience. Seeing the sparks fly from a successful parry never gets old, and touches like this go a long way to make actions you'll be repeating countless times
Como eu morri pra essa porra também, palhaço do inferno.
continue to feel satisfying. Also, seeing enemies fucking explode when you finish them with a critical hit is fantastic. Lastly, I really like the soundtrack. It's phenomenal, especially the records you can unlock and play in the hub area.
Just want you step from me, dance with me, you make me feel alright.
Now, I want to take a minute to discuss the overall critical reception of this game, and why it's making me feel like I'm going just a little crazy. I want to preface this by saying I'm not trying to discredit anyone, these are all just video game opinions at the end of the day, and review scores don't do a good job of capturing any level of nuance, but it blows my mind that Lies of P is receiving about the same level of critical success in types of discussions as something like, for example, Mortal Shell, another Souls-like. I apologize to Mortal Shell, I'm not trying to single you out, and it was made by a smaller team, so it's a great accomplishment for what it is, but Mortal Shell is what I consider simply a decent Souls-like. It's fun, has some really cool ideas, but it also has some serious design issues and shoddy execution that make me hesitate in giving it a full recommendation. The truth of the matter is, Lies of P is worlds apart from something like Mortal Shell. I'm not satisfied with calling Lies of P just decent, because I think the developers have achieved something truly special here. This is the real deal, and as one of the largest voices in the community, I feel compelled to make that as clear as I can. It really is on that level that I reserve for actual FromSoft games and stuff like Neo 2. And while I can see some people not agreeing because they think it's too similar to FromSoft, or too difficult, or unfair, or something else, that doesn't change my personal feelings toward the game. It's just a really good game. So yeah, Lies of P is not reinventing the wheel. It's not earth-shatteringly new. It's probably not going to make you feel anything you haven't felt before. It's familiar, but it brings more than enough new ideas to the table in a package with FromSoft levels of polish and execution. It's got a gorgeous world and a compelling story, and it commits so hard to the idea of Bloodborne Pinocchio that you'll forget how silly the premise is as you get sucked into its world. Its crushing difficulty in ways it mixes up the genre will undoubtedly push some people away, but for those who stick it out and are willing to learn, you're going to be in for one of the best games the Souls-like genre has to offer. I know it's probably not on most people's schedules given how packed this year's been with incredible games, but this one is worth your time too. All I can say is I'm incredibly excited to see what these devs do next, and unlike Pinocchio, I'm not lying. Thanks for watching, I really hope I did this game justice, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Na hora. O jogo é foda pra caralho, mano. A verdade é essa. Gostei demais dessa porra. Ah, deu vontade de jogar. Eu gostei tanto do jogo que eu deu vontade de comprar no PlayStation, no PlayStation, para platinar. Eu vou comprar, provavelmente. Só vai esperar uma promoção, que agora não faz sentido comprar preço cheio. Vou ver esse vídeo aqui curtinho. Tem mais algum vídeo dele legal? Porque eu queria ver se ele fez algum vídeo sobre Armored... Não, Armored Core não, é Lords of Shadow. Não é Lords of Shadow, porra. Lords of the Fallen. Ele tá postando bem pouco vídeo, né? Ultimamente. Dois no último... Em um mês, dois... É 2 por mês quase, né? Que demora pra fazer os vídeos dele. Não, aqui ele teve um tempinho sem fazer. Talvez esteja focando em outras paradas, né?
You know...
Oh, porra. Eu odeio quando isso acontece.
I'm incredibly excited to see what these devs do next. And unlike Pinocchio, I'm not lying. Thanks for watching. I really hope I did this game justice.
Eu já vi essa parte. Beleza, então. Vou ver esse vídeo curtinho aqui.
Greetings, Tarnished. Here is your weekly dose of Souls. A community mod developer was learning a new game engine and decided to port the entire Dark Souls 3 starting location into Unreal Engine 5.
Eu queria colocar a música do Bloodborne, né? Dark Souls 3 ainda continua bonito, né, mano?
It's not perfect, but for a concept piece it's extremely impressive, especially the water physics, improved lighting, and the background landscapes fit much better into the scene. Have you ever wondered what a first-person perspective would look like in Elden Ring? Well, that dream is now a reality.
Eu nunca me perguntei como seria jogar Elden Ring em primeira pessoa. Na moral, velho, eu nunca gosto de jogos... Eu não gosto de jogos em primeira pessoa, de combate assim. Tipo, o Skyrim eu só jogava em primeira pessoa porque o modo terceira pessoa dele era muito ruim. O combate era bem bosta. Aí era mais fácil de acertar em primeira pessoa. Mas eu nunca usaria esse mod, velho.
The FPS project is designing a first-person experience, and it's currently in open beta. This mod is looking incredible, and the feature list is extensive already. Instant perspective switching is possible at any point. You can move the head independently from the body to freely look around the environment. You can even customize your crosshairs.
Fica legal não, hein?
Since the mod is currently in beta, changes can be made based on feedback. The creators have already implemented fixes for issues like head bobbing and camera shake, and even issues with terrain clipping have been addressed with new collision systems. The project is looking great, and seeing as this team already made a first-person mod for Dark Souls 3 in the past, I think it's likely it gets completed. This next clip proves that Elden Ring is actually a comedy game. In Invasion news, Bloodhound users are evolving, just backwards.
Hello! You're so smart. You're so smart. He's still alive. He's like a god damn it. Just...
The Elden Ring Twitch Rivals tournament has come to a close, with Team Distortion and Team Maximum beating 14 other teams. The tournament had its fair share of drama, with popular Twitch streamer XQC rage-quitting
Nunca joguei esse Coliseu.
and uninstalling the game. The tournament also had a quite streamer XQC rage-quitting and uninstalling the game. The tournament also had a quite controversial
O cara quitou, o cara deu rage quit e desinstalou o jogo, mano. Tão puto que ele ficou.
and extensive ban list for builds and weapons for the sake of competition. Ouroboros Day 1 best of 3 against Starkris ended up being one of the most intense sets in a tournament ever.
Ooh, the blood loss. He might beat me. Oh, what happened? Wow, what a fight. He's good. Oh, man. Oh, you gotta be kidding me.
Ending with 2 victories, 1 loss, and 2 extremely rare stalemates. It was very interesting to see how Ouroboros started to identify his opponent's strategy and then build a counter as the set progressed.
GG. I think that was the best Elden Ring fight I've ever had. I play this game for a living.
Elden Ring is celebrating its 1-year anniversary this week, and it came with an announcement from Bandai Namco that the game has sold 20 million copies in its first year of release. Just as Rani said in the story trailer, the shattering of previous sales records ensued, and Elden Ring has outperformed all previous From Software game sales, and it's not even close. All in just 1 year. Thanks so much for watching. I'm enjoying being the news guy. You know, it's kind of fun.
Eu não joguei nem pouco do PVP do Elden Ring, cara. Assim, o PVP, o máximo que eu joguei PVP foi quando os caras me invadiam, né? Mas eu sempre jogava offline. Quando eu jogava co-op, eu colocava meu sinalzinho no chão pra ajudar a galerinha, aí o pessoal era invadido, aí eu conseguia. Vamos lá, vamos limpar a lista. Coloquei bastante vídeo desse maluco, né? Drum Roll Tony. Bom, eu quero ver um último vídeo antes de fechar a live. Aí mais tarde eu abro de novo. Eu tenho que jantar, né? Faz tempo que eu não vejo vídeo do Sunlight Blade, né, mano? Deixa eu ver se tem alguma coisa legal pra adicionar aqui. Vamos ver aqui. Ainda tem coisa de Dark Souls 1, caralho. Isso aqui é Dark Souls 1? Deve ser algum ad, não é possível. É, Maraca. Aí ele faz um ad. Vou adicionar pra ver depois. Parece interessante de ver. Eu gostava pra caralho de ver esses vídeos dele. Ele tá postando pouco, né? Ele voltou recentemente. A comunidade inteira, os 2 canais que eu mais acompanhava de Dark Souls. E os caras estão postando pouca coisa. Limit Breakers. Interessante. Salva na playlist. Eu não odeio. Eu coloquei. Eu não vi esse vídeo. Eu comecei a ver. Metal Gear. Eu ia ver esse vídeo. Vi no Twitter. Interessante. Curtinho, né? Vamos ver. Bom vídeo. Quebra a expectativa. Bom vídeo. Essa aqui é a minha vibe? Twist. Foi um hit kill? Não, mas foi, caralho, foi quase um hit kill, mano. Tá errado, esse não é possível. Tá igual nele, tá igual nele. Uau, mano. Pixel, cara. Um pixel de HP, você é louco, mano. Nunca vi esse vídeo lá no Solar. É o canal oficial dele? Toma, eu quero uma lenda, pô. Dela que é escrotíssimo de iniciar, não é? Visualmente a Malenia é muito foda, né, mano? Tipo, os golpes que ela faz, a quantidade de golpes que ela dá. Tipo, assistir uma luta dela é muito da hora. O problema é lutar com ela. Mano, ela recuperar a luta, ela recuperar HP é um nível de escrotice, cara, que eu vou te falar.
Hey!
Porra, mano. Vai se fuder, mano. Vai se fuder, mano. Olha aí, mano. Pera aí. Velho. Normal não. Vamos colocar mais lento ainda do que o normal. Vamos lá. Começou a putaria. Ó a quantidade de HP. Tá quase com a vida dela. Não, vai tomar. Vamos. Se prepara. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 hits, mano. 7 hits, cara. E o HP veio. Mano, o HP volta ainda, cara. Velho, como é que eu matei essa desgraçada? Só co-op, obviamente. Mas mesmo no co-op, é foda. Nem todo mundo que vai. Excelente vídeo. Excelente vídeo. Deixei o like aqui, já. A Legend. O canal dele. Ele já tem isso de vídeo? Já tem vídeo até. Só de Elden Ring, né? O vídeo que hoje tem 1 ano. Vamos ver, esse aqui é o vídeo mais visto dele. Eu não participei tanto assim de acompanhar a comunidade, tá ligado? Ok. É impróprio por quê? Porque ele tá usando uma tanguinha? É por isso que é impróprio. O cara tá um maluco seminu. Sarado, arregaçando. A Malena, acho que é por causa disso, que é impróprio. Muito foda essa roupa da Black Knight. Tudo pro lado de jogo é foda, galera. São 15 hits, velho. Vai tomar no cu, mano. Não dá, mano. O nível de concentração e o nível de dedicação que o cara tem que ter, mano. Dedicação, paciência, tempo, né? Tudo.
Difficulty is in the eyes of the beholder.